Peace, peace. This your host, Selah Shalom, and this is the Cosmon Teachings in the words of Jehovah and his angel ambassadors from the Cosmon Bible, Owaspi. And the topic of discussion today is called the story of Caillou, better known as Confucius. Now, God's book of Esdras, chapter 31, verse 1 through 20, it states, verse 1, Phanactus, chief of the million Lu'is, sent by God down to the earth, to China, to raise up an heir capable of the voice of God, sent word to God in paradise, saying, verse 2, Greetings to thee, O God, in the name of Jehovah. Thy son is born, and his name is Caillou. He is son of Yehe, who is sub-king of Tisao. Behold, thy son Caillou is Katisan, in parentheses, Aisu, in the borders, whose mother, Chingsa, is not 15 years old. And Yehe was father to 12 children previously. And here it states that the child was born Aisu. And the term Aisu is referring to a child that is born neutral, meaning no earthly desires. Verse 3, Let us rejoice before Jehovah, who hath quickened into life this tree of universal knowledge. Verse 4, Also my hosts have brought about more than 3,000 births, who shall become his disciples in time to come. So here is showing you how God, through his masters of generations, planned these things out hundreds of years before they happen. Verse 5, God returned answer to Phanactus, saying, In Jehovah's name, all praise to thee and thy hosts. Thy words have been proclaimed in paradise. There is great joy in heaven. Send the grades of mortals resurrection in China, with doctrines and rites and ceremonies in the dominion of the spirits of the dead. Verse 6, Phanactus then applied to the angels who had charge of the numerating and appraising of mortals as to their grades in spiritual intercourse, and having obtained the reports, he made selections, and reported as followeth to wit. Verse 7, Phanactus, greeting to God, son of Jehovah. Ling, son king of China, with 12 sub-kingdoms, one to represent every month of the year, 406 millions of mortals, 2,700 million angels, not fettered by angel tyrants. Of the angel emissaries of the truant gods, 1,500 million. Now here is a breakdown of the grades and rates. Verse 8, mortal grades, 8 maximum, 80 minimum, nothing. Of 50s, 1 to 7. Of 25, 1 to 3. Of 10s, 1 to 1. But of 75s, 1 to 40. Mostly guardian births. Verse 9, the rise in the 11th year, 2. In the 23rd, 5. In the 100th, 12. Verse 10, of rites and ceremonies, 72. Of sacrifice without compunction, 35. Verse 11, funeral rites, 98. Observances in full, 45. Verse 12, perception in Suez, 1 to 362. In Sargos, 1 to 6,208. And Suez and Sargos is the ability to hear and see angels. Verse 13, of spirits in Sargos, 1 to 33,000. Of first and second resurrection, mostly Ashars, guardian angels. Verse 14, Phanactus said, Because China instituted reverence for the dead, the funeral rites have become worshipful. Verse 15, after the body is put away, either buried or burnt, mortals read prayers on 3 succeeding days, at sunset, chanting the virtue and love of the dead, and often the spirit returns to them in the house, taking on Sargos, like a mortal, and talking to their mortal kin. Verse 16, of Jujas, not attained to live alone, 700 millions. Of these, 30% are in declination, and 70 in ascension. Verse 17, of mortals in drunk, meaning darkness, 16%. Of mortals in idleness, including drunks, 20%. Verse 18, of such as are addicted to secret evils and pollution, 70%. Of abortionists, 1%. Of 1/2. Verse 19, Phanactus said, Owing to the veneration for and to the rites of the dead is Spigas increase attributed. Verse 20, furthermore, thy servant herewith sendeth to thee for the libraries of heaven a full record of the cities and countries, places of China, and the grade and rate of every mortal. So this is an example of the grades and rates of mortals and angels. Now, chapter 32, verse 1 through 10, it states, verse 1, Caillou, Confucius, grew up to be a man in every way adapted to the work for which the Lu'is, masters of generations, had made him born into the world by command of God. Verse 2. And it came to pass that the disciples were also born and duly prepared by the angels of God to become co-workers with Confucius. Of these disciples, 72 were called chief disciples, that is, 6 from each of the 12 kingdoms and sub-kingdoms of China. Verse 3. God had said, Suffer not Caillou, Confucius, and his chief disciples to know they are instruments in my hand, neither suffer them to know that my angels inspire them, nor suffer them to know that they come from their respective kingdoms by my voice through my angels. Verse 4. In one age, to say a matter cometh by inspiration or by the angels is rendered the matter impotent, and yet in another age, to not profess inspiration or angel presence is to render the matter impotent. Verse 5. The later condition is now upon China. Let my angels heed this. Verse 6. When Caillou, Confucius, was ready for the work of God, there came to him from the 12 provinces of China 72 men and women of great learning, having heard of Caillou's wisdom. None of these knew they had been inspired to come. Verse 7. Caillou said unto them, Why have ye come? Some gave one reason and some another. Verse 8. Caillou said, These great happenings are the work of the ever-present. Verse 9. Let us conduct ourselves as gods. The Great Spirit will then answer us. Verse 10. Let us sit in crescents after the manner of gods. So this is an example how God inspired mortals without their knowing. Chapter 33, verse 1 through 30, it states, verse 1, God established a line of light from his throne in heaven down to Caillou. By the presence of 500,000,000,000 angels maintained he this light of heaven with mortals. Verse 2, that which was inspired of God came to the soul of Caillou, Confucius. What God spoke, that spoke Caillou. Verse 3, and God so spoke through Caillou that man might not know it was God speaking, for he desired to inspire man to self-culture instead of relying on gods and angels as heretofore. So it's showing you how God used different methods to inspire mortals to culturing self, relying on self and understanding self instead of depending on the oracles and the angels. Verse 4, in the language of Caillou, the Great Spirit was called Sang Ti, but the word Ti was God. The words, the Shang Ti, were the gods. Verse 5, Caillou said, Behold, man hath blocked the road to wisdom. In one place he hath heaped up thousands of books of the ancients, and in another place he wastes time in rites and ceremonies. Verse 6, our labor is to remodel the whole, by choosing from all the past that which is best. T, God, will guide us in this. Verse 7, we must therefore make one book acknowledging the ever-present Great Spirit, and his one, Shang Ti, true God. And this book must contain all the glory and beauty now contained in the 700 sacred books of the empire. Verse 8, since there are 486 books on the intermediate world, which no man can learn, we must take from them all their soundest parts and make one book thereof. Verse 9, and in the same connection, there being 1,270 books on the spirits of the dead, and their testimonies of the lower and higher heavens, we must make one book thereof. Verse 10, and of the 2,200 books on magic, and on conjuring spirits, and on second sight and second hearing, we must make one book thereof. Verse 11, of books of families there are more than 4,000, which shall also be condensed into one book. Verse 12, of histories there are more than 4,000 books, which shall be condensed into one book. Verse 13, of law books there are more than 12,000 books, and of the precedents of judges and decrees there are more than 30,000 books. All of these shall be condensed into one book. Verse 14, of provinence and of the empire, and of the governors and emperors thereof, there are 2,700 books, which shall be condensed into one. Verse 15, and of government there are 700 books, which shall be condensed into one. Verse 16, of caste there are 490 books, and of properties 320. And all of these shall be condensed into one book. Verse 17. Caillou continuing said, my work is to bring confusion to a termination of doctrines and laws and rites and ceremonies and philosophies of both heaven and earth. We had enough. Verse 18.